A big update just came out for We Who Are About to Die, introducing a brand new perk system that's going to totally change the feel of the game, as well as some new maps and a few other small but really important features. So let's get right into it and talk about these new perks, or traits. There are about 50 new traits split into 3 categories: positive, neutral, and negative. Positives are all good and negatives are all bad, with neutrals being a mix of good and bad, or more of a simple effect that might not necessarily be good or bad. There are traits with smaller effects like minor stat changes, all the way to really big things like missing an arm or a leg. I'm not going to talk about every trait in detail in this video because that's going to be a whole other video, but for now let's go over the basics of how this new system works. When you start a new character, you'll get a bunch of traits, typically anywhere from 1 to 3 positives and negatives, with maybe a neutral in between. So new runs ought to feel pretty different from each other, and you'll probably have to try some different playstyles. You can also earn more traits during the run. These traits are always going to be positive, and they come from special fights. Boss fights, which previously rewarded you with the very powerful boss weapons, now also reward traits. Tournaments, on the other hand, only rewarded coin and fame before, now they also reward traits. So when you finish one of these fights, you'll get a choice of 3 traits, and you'll also have the choice to skip if you don't like the ones you got, or maybe you want to try to get a different one next time. You might even want to skip the fight entirely if there's a different fight paying a lot more. You only have 4 trait slots anyway, and there'll always be more than 4 special fights, so the only downside to skipping is that you'll get your traits a little bit later, but you won't miss out on them. The new calendar feature is handy for seeing when you'll get a fight that rewards a trait, and it also shows you which boss fights you're going to get. So that's pretty much the basics of the trait system taken care of. Now let's talk about another brand new feature: ambushes. It's now possible that after a fight you'll be ambushed by thieves in the city streets and you'll have to defend yourself. You'll have the same gear equipped that you just used in your fight, and the thieves are only 50 HP with little to no gear, so it shouldn't be too hard to fend them off. If you successfully defend yourself, you'll get some money. If you lose, it's not too bad because you won't actually die and lose your run, you just end up unconscious and you lose some money. You also have the option to skip the ambush entirely and run away, but you'll still lose a bit of money this way. Really, I'd recommend doing the fight unless your health is really low, because they aren't that hard and they can actually reward a decent amount of coin. So those 2 are the biggest additions in this update, but there's still more new content to talk about, starting with some changes to the weight and stamina regen system. Before, it was really simple: the more gear you wore, the slower your stamina recovered. That same system is still in place, but there's a little more to it now. There are now 3 tiers of weight: light, medium, and heavy. If you're in the medium tier, it's the same as before. Your stamina regen is just affected by your weight. But if you're in the light or heavy tiers, then in addition to your stamina regen being affected, you also gain bonuses or penalties to a few stats. Lighter characters can move around better, but get pushed around, whereas heavy characters are a bit more sturdy, but a bit slower. Makes sense, and it adds a little more depth to certain builds, like if you're really going heavy with armor and a 2-hander, for example. There are also some traits that work differently depending on your weight, so pay attention if you got one of those. Next up, we got a couple new early game maps in this update: the City Slums and the City Market. The Slums is a pretty small map. It's a bit different in that it's longer but very narrow. You might want to be careful when you're picking fights and avoid really high numbers on this map. As for the Market, this is a map with a decent amount of space, and I don't think there are really any special considerations to take into account with it. And the last major bit of content I want to mention is an update to throwing. Throwing has always been a niche combat style in this game, but it might have finally gotten the change it needs to be really good. So for the most part, throwing normal weapons hasn't actually changed, but certain weapons like the throwing pilly and the new throwing chaka have been changed so that they no longer work like normal weapons. Instead, you automatically throw them anytime you make an attack. They've also been given a brand new bonus that makes them do double damage on a throw. This makes them pretty strong on their own, but combine them with certain traits and they can actually become some of the most powerful weapons in the game. So while it might still not be a strategy you want to rely on every fight or every run, if you do see a throwing pilly lying around on the ground, you might want to try giving it a toss now more than ever. And one last semi-related thing you'll notice is that other weapons and equipment have more traits now too. Lots of footwear items will give you a bonus to movement, for example, or you'll find a weapon that might give bonuses to its own weapon skill. This is a pretty minor change that won't make a huge difference to any one item's power level, but it's worth checking which items do what now. And that's that for this update. Really, the meat of it is in the new trait system, and like I mentioned off the start, I'll be making a whole other video going into detail on all the traits, which ones are good, which ones are bad, and some cool things you can do with them. I'll also be making a bunch of videos showing some different builds using different combinations of traits, as well as a brand new updated weapon tier list in the next little while. So if you aren't subscribed to the channel and you want more We Who Are About to Die content, go ahead and subscribe. And if you are subscribed already, well, I appreciate you. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed the update, and I'll see you later.